Okay, still continuing on. Grabbed a coffee because I've been doing this longer than I intended. I was only going to do chapter 1 or session 1 today, and it's like now that I've started, because it's such a huge story to outline, and I haven't started it because there are so many facets to this situation, and what it comes down to is community being destroyed by gutless creeps who have got positions of employment related to support services. And over the past week, particularly since the horrific thing that happened at Bondi a couple of weeks ago, when someone completely mentally ill murdered 6 people and harmed many more, including a baby. And women have been murdered over the last couple of weeks. They're always, men and women are being murdered by lunatics, whether it's in their own family, their spouse, their offspring, their family members, whatever. It's happening all the time. But all of the public outcry that there needs to be more support for women when they're dealing with abusers, they're completely leaving out the fact that women and vulnerable men and the elderly of both sexes report abuse, are seeking protection and support from particularly government services, but there's also other more private support services that relate to, safe houses and all that kind of thing. In every single area of those support services, you find absolute mongrels working there, that they don't have to be having a bad day to be disrespectful, horrid, cause more trauma, harass victims when they turn to those establishments, whether they're looking for accommodation, whether they're looking for other forms of protection. Even I'm personally aware of, through police officers saying how corrupt and abusive some senior police officers are, that people are left exposed to the abusers they're enduring because of deliberate inaction. But our government and the public at large need to wake up to themselves, and it's just as rampant as going into a retail store and you have a lovely person working there that provides great customer service and ethical sales support, whatever, guidance, and then you've got a-holes working in that same establishment that are nasty to customers, nasty to other staff, lie about a product, that it's good for you, serviceable for you, blah, 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 and nothing gets done about those negative impact staff because they're friends with other staff, and usually, always, they're friends with the managers. Okay, and I've experienced that since moving back to Sydney in February 2021, that when I look further into why is such an abusive creep, one of them was abusing an elderly woman, and I stepped in to say something. But I've done that in Bega, down the coast, in a country area, so it's not just the city. Why is that staff member getting away with that disgusting behaviour towards customers around decent staff? It's always management. So when you're looking at women losing their lives, men are losing their lives, children are losing their lives, and yet often in these cases they've already been reaching out for protection and support, but those resources haven't come together to protect them. It's not just that there's a lack of funding and resources. It's just as often that there are mongrel staff working in those support areas. So this is just my way of getting it out there, Instagram, Twitter, all of those kinds of platforms to speak about what's truly wrong and where the shortcomings are, they're very hit and miss. This story that I'm telling about mine and my child's experience, that has directly come from the conduct of my own personal family members who are covered for by criminally abusive government staff with the most influence and authority. It's linked to exactly what's being televised, and everyone is rightly up in arms at the moment and trying to bring real change to the services available and the protection available through those services. But no one is talking about the negligent to abusive staff who work in those departments. Housing New South Wales. You've got people working in Housing New South Wales that are terrific. You've also got the most insecure, nasty, mean-spirited, abusive people working in Housing New South Wales who abuse, they're negligent. So if you're dealing with someone working in Housing New South Wales and they're negligent in their role and they cause government tenants problems, if that government tenant speaks up, then there's so many ways for those staff to diminish the complaint, or if it gets through to say something like the residential tribunal, then those staff can still harass and cause problems and manipulate and be dishonest about that tenant in some way. Then go to the tribunal, and if there's family or friends working in the tribunal as tribunal members that are making the decisions, if they're friendly with, say, Housing New South Wales staff, or they have like only unethical tribunal members will do this, but if they've got some kind of, they have more respect for, say, Housing New South Wales staff than they do for tenants that are financially stuffed or were homeless and had to get housing from Housing New South Wales, that kind of thing. You've got so many of those tribunal members that are horrible, unethical people that you can't even turn to our government departments and get the support that they are paid to give you, the determinations that they are paid to come to according to legislation and law. You've really got to have more decent people in all areas. And that's why at one point I started studying real estate, because I wanted to be a free source of advice on the practicalities. Get all your ducks in a row and then know that you could be dealing with an unethical tribunal member at NCAT. So I'm just trying to think what NCAT stands for, but it's the housing. It's where you go when you've got disputes with rent or retailers, business, or if you've got customers that have ripped you off as a business person, or if you've got tenants that are ripping you off as a landlord or real estate agent. You can't rely on our government departments and their staff, and you can't even rely on private establishments in support of people being abused or people that are homeless. That there's housing out there, because I observed and was advised firsthand of Housing New South Wales staff making people wait for housing when they had 6 or 8 houses empty, and then when people they knew came into the system, they gave them the best houses available. Because at one point I was told, you're getting the best house available. My son and I were on the list for 10 years before we were offered a house with Housing New South Wales, and accepting the house was the worst thing I ever did, because those monsters at Housing New South Wales, I was only there a few days and I was sent a termination notice for a water bill of $6 or something like that, and that $6 water bill belonged to the previous tenant that moved out apparently 6 months before my child and I got there. But within a few days, I received a termination notice. A few days after the commencement of my lease and our occupation, a termination notice for water rates unpaid. And the reason that happened was, so that would have been 2009, early 2010. The reason that happened was because from 1996, while I was living in Sydney, I was addressing Housing New South Wales staff in the Bega Valley abusing vulnerable, frail people that were renting properties from the staff at Housing New South Wales Bega office. I stepped in and wrote letters in support of people that were enduring abusive staff. So when I finally, for the first time, went into leasing that property directly from Housing New South Wales, just vulnerable to every bit of dishonest, abusive rot that those people, male and female, I think there was one male working in the Bega office and probably about 8 females. One of them I grew up knowing and I really liked her, but the information that she told other people about working at Housing New South Wales in Bega, of course, who she told is a big mouth and loves drama and she elevates her ego by trashing others, but then also gossiping and telling stories. I was quite pleased to know more inside information about Housing New South Wales office in Bega and those staff. But from 1996, I knew what absolute mongrels they were. And when I moved back down the coast to Bega, to Tathra actually in 2000, all of those same horrid women were obviously still working in that Bega office because I found out who was there because, I re-met the girl that I'd grown up with and she went back to work there because the money was too good for her to stay at home and raise her own children. She was spent her life incredibly well off because her parents sadly passed away at very young ages, but they were well off and she's always been well off. And she didn't need to go back to work, but the perks with her Housing New South Wales and the elevated pay, she went back for the money after she had her kids. And so that information about these horrid females came to me before and after I rented a house from December 2009 to June 2012. The whole time my child and I were in that Housing New South Wales house, after renting, expensive homes around the area from 2000 to 2009, the horrible things that they would do, completely dishonest, completely harassing, blatantly to cause trauma to me. Because I'm trying to raise a child and keep a roof over his head and keep a happy environment, which I did maintain always. I always made sure that he had the best of everything, and I was happy to go without everything myself. But I was running businesses. But even when I closed my stores before reopening, there was a couple of years there that I closed my stores and then reopened again in 2012. While I was in that Housing New South Wales house, low rent wasn't worth it. It was traumatizing for me as a parent, keeping everything from my child, of course. Those cows and one male there sending me termination notices for things that for negative things that didn't actually occur and didn't involve me. They can do that to intimidate you and silence you and try and wear you down so that you never speak up about this needs fixing or that needs fixing or those staff were negligent and this is the negative impact we have. They can do whatever they like, and sending termination notices for a $6 something water bill or overdue water bill that belonged to a tenant 6 months, that vacated 6 months before we even moved in. They did that deliberately because all of this action came from the Bega office and these horrid females. Cut to 2012 when I rented a store with residents above in 2012. The real estate agent was a real creep. Like, he really was a creep. The landlord seemed supportive and wanted me to do well in Cobargo because he lived in Cobargo, his business was in Cobargo, an engineer, and his wife, they had a property in Cobargo, she raised horses, all this kind of thing. So he tried to do the right thing by me as the landlord, but when he came into my store and said, he said, like, the lease was coming up. So I signed a 12-month lease to see how my retail business went in Cobargo. I'd also opened another store in Bega again at the same time. And he came into the store because the end of lease was coming up, and he offered to renew my lease and everything. And I said, look, I'm not willing to continue with Gary as the property manager because he's negligent, and then he's incredibly disrespectful when you point out that he needs to do this and he hasn't done this, or he has said that he's going to do this and he still hasn't done this, that the rent has been paid but he's saying that it hasn't been paid, things like this. I said, I'm running a business, I'm raising a child, you know, I've got things on my plate and I don't need a manipulative, dishonest property manager. I didn't say all of this. I just said I'd be happy to sign another lease, but I cannot have Gary in Bermagui as the property manager. And the landlord said, well, look, I'll talk to him about it and get back to me. So I had no problems with the landlord at all. And then the next day, I got this bitchy, stupid email from Gary at Bermagui Real Estate. That's not the name of his business because there's a couple of real estate agents in Bermagui, but Gary owns his own real estate agent, and I'd have to double check the name of it. But he sent me this bitchy, ridiculous email saying that something about me not wanting to deal with him, so I'm not being offered to renew my lease. So I wrote back to him and said, the landlord's already offered to renew my lease agreement, but I will not do so if he retains you as his property manager. That's the fact. So he came to me. I've already been offered to renew the lease, but Gary from the real estate agent in Birmingham was trying to dishonestly taint my reputation as a leasee of a store with a dwelling above and a nice big backyard. He was trying to deliberately taint me as a business person and tenant by saying that I'm not being offered to renew my lease. So I had to correct that in writing. And then as he proceeded, he kept trying to make out in writing that I was a problematic tenant. Like, he's not going to do the exiting property inspection himself because I don't know what words he used. Like I don't respect him, where I always spoke to him in a matter-of-fact manner. When he started his mucking around and abusing my time with his idiotic behaviour, I didn't speak to him in any way. I do everything in writing because I like to have a paper trail of exactly what happened when. And so he was really making effort to try and taint me as a tenant, and we just proceeded. And then I'd already given the date that we were vacating the property, and the removalists had come and taken everything, and my son and I were there just cleaning because my son at the age of, he was 14. He'd turned 14, yep. At the age of 14, couldn't have been, as always, just so helpful and wonderful, and, you know, helped me pack up everything and pack up the whole place, the shop and the residence, to make it easier for these mongrel movers from Narooma. Mick was the owner of that removalist, who stole some of my stock and mongrels, just mongrels. Anyway, as it proceeded, my son, Angus and I had packed everything up and we'd just stayed back. Angus was helping me clean, and it must have been a Sunday. Everything was out of the place. I had the vacuum cleaner. I'd cleaned everything and just vacuuming, and the power went out. And I was still paying rent. Like, we weren't there outside of rent being paid. I'd given the date that it was going to be empty and available to them, so they knew it. But the power went off, and I walked outside, and here's the landlord, George, and his wife, Sheridan, at the light box. They'd pulled out whatever whatever it is that they pulled out, whatever it was, so that there was no power. So I couldn't even finish vacuuming because it was dark. And so, but I already cleaned the whole place. The only thing I was vacuuming was us running up and down the stairs, and they were carpet stairs. So that's where I was vacuuming to leave. And the next thing, I am told that Gary from Bermagui had submitted an application to the tenancy tribunal for my eviction. And so I was being evicted, and if I didn't take any action, the sheriff would turn up and lock us out and blah, 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 blah. So I phoned the tribunal staff at Wollongong, because the South Coast has Wollongong. I phoned the staff in Wollongong and told them what had been going on and said I can prove it all in writing. And they said he lodged an application for your termination of your lease agreement and is looking for my forced eviction, even though he already knows that I'm moving out and cleaning the place with days to spare. She said, very professionally and really wonderfully, she said, he is messing with you. This is Gary from Bermagui Real Estate. He is messing with you and trying to cause you as much stress as possible, threatening a sheriff's going to turn up and lock you out when you're not even there. This entire action is completely redundant, because by the time the sheriff gets this information, you're going to be 2 weeks, 3 weeks already gone. She said he is doing this to destroy your tenant reputation, because once he's lodged that application, it's on file. So he's spitefully, dishonestly, and abusively, knowingly messing with the Australian government department that's tasked to protect landlords and tenants from abusive behaviour. So that's Gary from Bermagui, owning his own business. He grew up in Cobargo, Bermagui. The first time I met him, the biggest turkey, raving on about how fantastic he is and how much his family owns, blah, 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 blah. But George, my landlord, and his wife, Sheridan, and why everyone says that she owns everything, not George, when he's an engineer, Sheridan owns everything. They let him do this to me, knowing that George walked into my store before my lease had expired and offered to renew my lease. And I said, I can't continue and re-sign a new lease if Gary's going to be the property manager. And that's where I left it. And the next thing was this bitchy email from Gary saying, well, we're not going to offer you to renew your lease and blah, 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 and then started to negatively trash me. So why I'm talking about Gary specifically is that he was best friends with the mongrel. She's passed away, but she was a mongrel, rotten abuser who ran the Bega office of Housing New South Wales. She was there basically in charge from 1996, when I started speaking up for and writing letters and sending it to the Minister for Housing and all this kind of thing. She was there when I was addressing things for very vulnerable and people that didn't have the capacity to defend themselves against this dishonesty and abuse from 1996. And she was still there messing with my child and I when I accepted the Housing New South Wales house and moved in December 2009 and endured all of that disgusting traumatizing crap that was all dishonest from the Bega Office of Housing New South Wales until we moved out in June 2012. And then it turns out that she is discussing me with this little mongrel. He's older than me. He's probably nearly in his 70s now. Gary from the Bermagiri real estate agent. She's discussing me and my rentals or rental with Housing New South Wales with this little mongrel who's doing his best to dishonestly and abusively, and basically it's criminally, sabotage me and my reputation with complete dishonesty, because they can't help but brag about what they know and what they've been told. He let the cat out of the bag, and I found out exactly what was going on. She passed away as the best friends of the biggest monsters that live in Cobargo, stalking, harassing, abusing, threatening creeps that others have said are fully related to drug abuse and dealing, but they're always in the main street. And when I kind of said, oh, keep away from my store with all that rot that you go on with, gloating about your drug dealing and drug abusing friends, I don't want it around my store, then they started harassing my child and I on a daily basis at night time as well. This big buff-headed monster would fang up the main street in his, what was it, a Kingswood? I'm thinking red. Yeah, maybe it was a Kingswood, I'm not sure. Just loved his hot cars, big fat turkey. Buffhead, hanging out the window, roaring. My child, who is 12, 13, and then 14, dealing with this rot at night time, driving past our home at night. He's been to school or sports, whatever, and then we've got this monster screaming and roaring, tooting the horn, going up the main street. Other people living in the main street of Cobargo were enduring it as well, but it was all directed at us. And then they coerced a couple of really not popular, two girls that were 20, 21, and they started harassing us as well. So Housing New South Wales employ monsters. Even though this one's passed away, there was 8 women there. The bloke that worked there was also horrible. I would say 6 of those women between 1996 to 2012, 6 of those staff at the Bega Office of Housing New South Wales were manipulative, horrid, abusive mongrels that their insecurity and nastiness combined, they got off on mistreating people, talking down to people, disrespecting them, treating them like they're stupid, all that kind of thing. So Housing New South Wales, well, we've got these problems with women desperately needing accommodation. Housing New South Wales kind of control all of that, emergency housing and shelters and things like all that I know of, all of those emergency accommodation places, if you're fleeing somewhere, they're all overseen by Housing New South Wales. So if you're trying to get that kind of housing, you've got to go through Housing New South Wales and put your name in there. So that's why there's so many people on the streets. That's why there's so many people living in cars. That's why parents and children are safer in their cars parked in a good neighbourhood, or if they've got dogs that they've got to exercise, they'll park near a park so that they can exercise their dogs when their dogs have got to do their business but still have their kids safe in the car. This is why there's so many people that are homeless. I would no sooner seek assistance with Housing New South Wales than fly if I was in a situation where I desperately needed accommodation, ever, because you can be dealing with the most monstrous mongrels. And not only while you're experiencing difficulty, like with maybe homelessness or fleeing an abusive partner or something like that, you've also got to deal with these horrors that are employed to support and protect and do everything they can to support you when you're a decent person, being pleasant and thankful. They can do whatever they want. So that's a big part of the homelessness, that a lot of people are on the streets because they can't deal with Housing New South Wales or support staff, or now they just refuse to. That's a real situation. So thanks for listening. If you've gotten to the end of this almost half an hour, thank you for listening. But it is information that comes from absolute direct Awareness, experience. Take care.